He threw the marriage certificate across the table so hard it skidded off the edge and landed at her feet. Elena Vera stood in the center of a room that smelled like gun oil and cold coffee, her wrists still raw from zip ties, rain dripping off her hair onto a floor that probably cost more than her entire apartment. The man across from her, Cassian Rook, a name she'd heard whispered in the same tone people used for terminal diagnoses, didn't look up from the file in his hands. He just let the certificate lay there at her feet like garbage he'd already decided wasn't worth picking up. 7 days, he said. Every night my enemies are watching, you call me husband. You do it like you mean it. Elena looked at the paper on the floor, then back at him. She did not pick it up. I don't even know your last name, she said. You do now. If you were in that room, wet, alone, a stranger's name on a legal document at your feet, what would you do? Before we go any further, if stories like this one keep you up past midnight, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about that room, that certificate, or that man was what it appeared to be. 3 hours earlier, Elena had been doing the thing she always did when her life felt like it was sliding sideways. She was walking, not going anywhere specific, just moving, because standing still felt worse. The rain had started around midnight, and she hadn't bothered with an umbrella because the weather app had said 50% chance, and she'd decided to bet on the other 50. She lost. By the time she reached the corner of Delancey and South Street, her jacket was soaked through and her sneakers were making sounds like small wet animals with every step. The bar she'd been heading toward was closed. She could see the chairs up on the tables through the window. And she'd stood there for a moment, feeling the specific kind of stupid that comes from walking 20 blocks in the rain for nothing. That was when the black SUV pulled up. Not fast, not dramatic. It just rolled to a stop at the curb the way cabs do when they've already got your address in the system. The rear window came down, and a man she'd never seen before looked at her the way people look at things they've already made decisions about. Ms. Vera, he said, get in the car. I don't know you. No, but we know you. She should have run. Any reasonable person would have run. But Elena had spent enough years being afraid of the wrong things that the right things sometimes caught her off guard. And there was something in the way the man said it, not a threat exactly, more like a fact already established, that made her feet stay planted. 2 more men came up behind her before she could work out whether she was making the smart choice or the last choice of her life. The zip ties went on fast and without ceremony. Cassian Rook's headquarters was not what she'd expected, which she realized later was the first sign that nothing about the situation was going to follow the pattern she'd assumed. She'd expected somewhere dark. A warehouse maybe, or a parking structure with bad lighting and worse smells. What she got instead was the top 2 floors of a building that had once been a textile factory and had been converted into something that couldn't quite decide if it was an office or a residence. The ceilings were high. The furniture was expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. There were actual books on the shelves, not decorative ones, the kind with cracked spines and folded pages, and a window the length of the east wall that looked out over the bridge and the river beyond it, both of them dark and gleaming in the rain. Elena stood in the center of the main room and tried to calculate exits. There were 4 men she could see. Probably more she couldn't. The door she'd come through, a hallway leading somewhere she hadn't seen, and that massive window which wasn't an option unless she wanted to exit the building in the least useful way possible. Then Cassian Rook walked in. She'd seen photographs. Everyone had, if you knew where to look, or if you'd grown up in the parts of the city where his name got used as both warning and explanation. The photographs didn't get him quite right. They caught the surface, the controlled stillness, the way he carried himself like a man who'd never once been hurried by anyone. But they missed the eyes. The photographs made him look cold. In person, he looked something worse. He looked like he was paying attention. He crossed the room, set a thin folder on the table between them, and slid the marriage certificate out of it. Then he threw it. She'd already told you what happened next. What she didn't tell you, what she was still working out as she stood there with wet sneakers and her heart doing something irregular in her chest, was that the name on the certificate wasn't filled in by hand. It was typed. Both names. hers and his. This hadn't been put together tonight. "How long have you had this?" she asked. Cassian finally looked up from whatever he'd been reading. His expression didn't change, which she was already learning meant something specific. It meant the question wasn't going to get a straight answer. 7 days, he repeated. After that, the arrangement ends. "You didn't answer my question." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." They left her in a room off the hallway. Not a cell, which was almost more unsettling. It had a bed, a chair, a window with a lock she could see was serious, and a bathroom with actual towels. Someone had put a dry set of clothes on the bed, folded, her approximate size. She didn't touch them. She sat in the chair and thought about her father. Marcus Vera had died 14 months ago. The official story was a car accident, wet roads, bad visibility, a guardrail that hadn't been maintained properly. And Elena had spent 7 of those 14 months more or less accepting it, because the alternative, which was that the accident had been arranged, was the kind of thought that had no floor. Once you went through it, you kept falling. She'd started falling again about 4 months ago, going through his papers, and found something in the lining of an old briefcase she'd almost donated. A photograph of her father standing outside a building she didn't recognize, shaking hands with a man whose face was obscured by shadow and the angle of the shot. On the back, in her father's handwriting, R. If anything happens, the numbers are in the watch. She didn't know who R was. She still had the watch, her father's old piece, heavy and plain, the kind that wound itself. She'd turned it over 100 times looking for something hidden in the case or the band and found nothing. She'd been carrying it in her jacket pocket the night they put her in the car. She reached into her pocket now and closed her fingers around it. Still there. Cassian came back an hour later. He didn't knock. That told her something. Not arrogance exactly. More like a man who'd spent so long in spaces where everything belonged to him that the gesture had simply never occurred to him as necessary. He sat down in the other chair, the one across from her, and he looked at her the way he'd looked at everything else, with complete, unhurried attention. "I need you to understand something," he said. "I'm listening. What I'm asking you to do is dangerous. I'm not going to tell you otherwise to make it easier for you to agree." Elena studied him. "Who's trying to kill you?" "The right question," he said, and something shifted slightly in his expression. Not approval exactly, more like recalibration. "Someone inside my organization has been moving against the people closest to me. 2 are already dead. They were made to look like accidents." The word landed somewhere in her stomach. Accidents. "My father," she said. It wasn't a question. She watched Cassian's face, and she saw him decide in real time how much to give her. "Marcus Vera worked for me for 11 years, he said, not as muscle, as a forensic accountant. He was the one who helped me dismantle the old Serrano empire from the inside, rerouting funds, building paper trails that went nowhere, making sure the whole structure collapsed without dragging me down with it." Elena heard her own heartbeat. "He never told me," she said. "He wasn't supposed to. He was my father. He was protecting you." Cassian paused. It wasn't for effect. It was the pause of a man who understood the weight of what he was saying. The people who killed him believed he'd kept a record, a full accounting of every transaction, every bribe, every name. If that ledger exists, it's enough to destroy everyone still operating in this city. Both sides. "Both sides," Elena repeated. "Meaning your people too." "Meaning everyone." She let that sit. "And you think I know where it is?" "I think your father left it with the one person he trusted completely," Cassian said. "And I think you don't know you have it." She didn't sleep that night. She lay on top of the bed covers in the dry clothes she'd eventually put on because wet denim at 3 in the morning is its own specific kind of misery, and she stared at the ceiling and turned the watch over and over in her hands. Her father. 11 years. She'd been in college for part of that, and then working her entry-level jobs and fighting with her landlord and trying to figure out her life the way people in their 20s do. Badly, mostly, with occasional intervals of something that almost resembled direction. She'd known her father had consulting work he didn't talk about in detail. She'd assumed it was the regular kind of financial consulting where confidentiality agreements meant you didn't discuss clients over dinner. She had not assumed this. The watch. The numbers are in the watch. She'd checked the watch. She'd checked it thoroughly. She'd taken it to a jeweler once who told her it was a solid piece, nothing modified, nothing hidden, just a well-made mechanical watch. But she'd been checking for physical hiding places. What if the numbers weren't hidden in the watch? What if they were on it? She turned it over, moved to the window where the ambient light from the city below was enough to see by. The back of the case was plain, just the manufacturer's mark, and a serial number she'd read a dozen times without it meaning anything. Then she looked at the serial number again. 14 digits. That was too long. Standard serial numbers for this manufacturer ran 8 to 10 digits at most. She knew this because she'd looked it up once, early, when she was still examining everything. 14 digits. She stared at it until her eyes ached. Then she put the watch back in her pocket, went to the door, and knocked on it from the inside. The man on the other side took a moment. Then, "What?" "I need to talk to Rook. It's 4 in the morning. I'm aware of what time it is. Tell him I figured something out." A longer pause. Then footsteps receding down the hallway. Elena stood at the door and waited, the watch ticking against her palm with the slow, patient rhythm of something that had been keeping a secret for over a year. Cassian came to the doorway, looking like a man who'd also not slept, though on him it showed differently. Not disheveled exactly, more stripped down, like the version of himself he allowed when there was no audience. He was in a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, no jacket, and he looked at her with an expression that had a question in it, but wasn't asking it yet. "The watch," Elena said. She held it up. "The serial number on the back is 14 digits. This manufacturer doesn't make 14-digit serial numbers." Cassian went still in a specific way. Not the controlled stillness he wore like a second skin, something that happened involuntarily, the stillness of someone who just heard a sound they'd stopped expecting to hear. "Marcus gave you that watch. When I graduated college, said it was his father's." "It wasn't," Cassian said quietly. He stepped into the room and held out his hand, not demanding, just waiting. Elena looked at the watch, looked at him, and placed it in his palm. He studied the back for a long moment. Then he looked up. "These numbers," he said, "they're not a serial number. They're an account sequence, a key." He closed his hand around the watch carefully, like it was the kind of thing that broke. "Your father hid the access code to the ledger on the back of a watch and gave it to his daughter 12 years ago. He was protecting it," Elena said, "because no one would look there. No one who was looking for a ledger." Cassian set the watch on the table between them, gently, and looked at her. "No one except someone who knew Marcus well enough to know he'd hide the most important thing he ever had in the most ordinary place possible." Elena looked at the watch, then at Cassian. "You knew my father," she said. "Not an accusation, a realization." "Yes." "Did you know what they were going to do to him?" The question landed in the room and sat there. Cassian didn't flinch from it. He held it the way he held everything, steadily, like he'd already decided he owed it to her. "No," he said. "If I had known, he would still be alive." Elena believed him. She wasn't sure that was a good sign. What? Dawn came up gray and slow outside the locked window, and the city below them went from dark to merely dim, and Elena Vera sat across from the most feared man on the East Coast with her dead father's watch between them, and understood, clearly, finally, without the comfort of doubt, that the accident that had killed her father had never been an accident at all, and whoever had arranged it was still inside this building, somewhere close, probably already aware that she was here. Cassian picked up the watch again and turned it over once. He set it back down with the face up, the hand still moving, still counting. 7 days, he said, quieter this time. Different. Elena looked at the certificate still lying where it had landed near the table's edge. "You had my name on that before you ever met me," she said. "Yes. That means someone told you about me. Someone who knew my father." Cassian didn't answer, which was, she was learning, its own kind of answer. She reached out and picked up the marriage certificate. She looked at her name printed there in clean type next to his. She looked at the date. Not tonight's date. Months ago. "You've been planning this for a long time," she said. "Yes." "Why didn't you just ask me?" Cassian looked at her steadily. "Because the person I suspected of killing your father is someone who has a man watching your apartment. If I'd come to you through normal channels, you'd have been dead before you reached my door." Elena absorbed that. Outside, the first sounds of the city waking up filtered through the glass. A truck, someone's horn, the particular white noise of 8 million people beginning another day in complete ignorance of the room she was sitting in. She set the marriage certificate back on the table, face up, between the watch and the space where Cassian's hands rested. 7 days, she said. He held her eyes. 7 days, he confirmed. She didn't call him husband, not yet, but she didn't walk away from the table either. And in that room, with the watch ticking and the certificate between them and a dead man's secret sitting in both their hands, not walking away was already a kind of answer. The watch stayed on the table between them for the rest of that first gray morning, neither of them touching it, both of them aware of it the way you're aware of something that's about to change the shape of everything. Cassian made coffee. He did it himself, which surprised her. Walked to the kitchen at the far end of the space, found the machine, worked it without ceremony. He set a cup in front of her and sat back down with his own, and they drank in silence while the city outside got louder and the light shifted from gray to the particular flat white of an overcast New York morning. Elena wrapped both hands around the cup and thought about the 14 digits on the back of her father's watch and about the word Cassian had used, key. "Walk me through it," she said. "The ledger. What's actually in it?" Cassian looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Names, accounts, 11 years of financial architecture that connects every major criminal operation on the East Coast to the people who funded them. Politicians, judges, 3 men who sit on federal oversight committees." He paused. "Your father built the system originally to track the Serrano money. When he helped me dismantle Serrano, he kept building it. Not because I asked him to, because Marcus Vera was the kind of man who believed someone should be keeping the record. He never told me. He told me once that you were the most stubborn person he'd ever met," Cassian said. "He said if he told you what he was doing, you'd have insisted on helping, and he'd rather you be angry at him for keeping secrets than dead for knowing them." Elena felt something tighten behind her sternum. She didn't let it show. "So the ledger exists somewhere. You need the account sequence to access it. The sequence opens an encrypted archive, distributed across 3 servers, no single point of failure. Your father designed it so that even if someone found one server, they'd have nothing without the key. And you've known the key was on that watch this whole time." "No," Cassian said. "I knew Marcus hid it. I didn't know where. I've spent 14 months looking." Elena set her cup down. 14 months? You've been searching since he died." "Since before he died," Cassian said, and the way he said it, carefully, like he was placing weight on a surface he wasn't certain would hold, told her this was the part where the floor had a seam in it. She waited. 3 weeks before the accident," Cassian said, "Marcus came to me. He told me he thought someone inside the organization had figured out the ledger existed. He didn't know who. He said he'd moved the key somewhere they'd never look, and that if anything happened to him, I should find you." The cup was warm under her hands. She focused on that. "He knew they were going to kill him," she said. "He suspected. And you didn't stop it." Cassian held her eyes and didn't say anything, which was worse than whatever he might have said. "I put 3 men on him," he said finally. "They were found in the river 2 days before the accident. Whoever did this is not someone who makes mistakes." Elena looked at the window, at the gray sky, at the bridge beyond it. "Who inside your organization knew about my father?" "That's the question I've been trying to answer for 14 months. "And your best guess?" "I have several candidates," he said, "which is exactly why the next 7 days need to look completely ordinary from the outside. Whoever did this is watching me as carefully as I'm watching them. If they think I've found the key, they'll move. They'll move against me." "Yes. Which is why you needed a reason for me to be here that doesn't look like what it is." "A new wife," Cassian said, "is exactly ordinary enough to be overlooked. No one inside my organization would expect me to bring someone connected to Marcus Vera into this house. It reads as personal, emotional." He said the last word like it was a foreign object he'd found in his pocket. "Neither of which anyone who knows me would believe I'm capable of." Elena looked at him. "Are you capable of it?" Cassian picked up his coffee cup and didn't answer that either. They gave her a room on the 3rd floor with an actual lock, one she controlled from the inside, which she tested twice before she believed it. Someone had stocked the closet with clothes in her size. Not flashy, not cheap, the kind of clothes chosen by someone who'd done research rather than assumptions. She found that more unsettling than if they'd gotten it wrong. There was a man named Hollis who seemed to be assigned to her, not guarding exactly, more like escorting, appearing at her elbow when she moved between rooms, stepping back when she stopped, never touching her, never speaking unless she asked him something directly. He was maybe 45, had a face that had been hit several times and healed imperfectly, and he carried himself with the specific, exhausted competence of someone who'd been doing dangerous work for long enough that it had stopped feeling dramatic. "How long have you worked for Rook?" she asked him, the first afternoon. "Long enough," Hollis said. "That's not an answer." 12 years, he said, give or take. "Did you know my father?" Hollis looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. "I knew who he was." That's also not an answer. "No," he agreed, and didn't offer anything else. She spent the afternoon in the library. Actual books, she confirmed, actually read, with the watch in her hand and her father's ghost sitting somewhere just behind her left shoulder. She kept pulling the watch out and looking at the 14 digits and then putting it away again. Cassian had said he'd need time to trace the server architecture before they used the sequence. Using it wrong, he'd explained, in the wrong order or through the wrong access point, would trigger a deletion protocol her father had built in as a failsafe. One shot. They got one shot at it. She was thinking about that. About her father designing a system so careful it could destroy itself. When the door opened and a man she hadn't met yet walked in without knocking. He was taller than Cassian, broader, with dark hair shot through with gray at the temples, and the kind of easy confidence that fills a room before the body does. He looked at Elena the way people look at things they're deciding the value of. "So you're the wife," he said. Elena didn't stand up. "So you're someone who walks into rooms without knocking." Something moved in the man's expression. Not anger, closer to reassessment. He crossed to the chair across from her and dropped into it with the comfort of someone who'd spent years treating every room in this building as his own. "Dorian Vale," he said. "I run operations." "Elena Vera." "I know who you are." He looked at the watch in her hand just briefly, but she caught it. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine." "Cassian tells me you two met 6 months ago, through a mutual friend." She looked at him steadily. "That's right." "Funny. He never mentioned you." "He's a private person." He is, Dorian agreed. "Intensely private, which is why it's interesting. A woman nobody's ever seen him with, suddenly here, suddenly with a ring, suddenly being introduced to the people who run this organization." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and his voice stayed completely pleasant. "You understand why that might make some people curious." "I understand it perfectly," Elena said. "Do you have a question, or are you just here to let me know you're curious?" Dorian Vale looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was a good smile, warm, almost genuine, which made it the most alarming thing she'd seen in this building so far. "I like you," he said. "That's going to make this complicated." He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked back to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "The mutual friend," he said, without turning around. "What's their name?" Elena didn't miss a beat. "He asked me not to say." Dorian nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. Then he left, and she sat in the library with her pulse running about 15 beats faster than normal, and the watch ticking in her hand and the distinct, specific sensation of having just been measured by someone who was very good at measuring people. She found Cassian 20 minutes later. He was in a room she hadn't been shown yet, at the back of the second floor, standing over a table covered in paper. Not documents exactly, more like maps and photographs and handwritten notes in small, tight script that she couldn't read from the doorway. He looked up when she came in. "Dorian Vale just interrogated me," she said. "I know." "You sent him?" "No." Cassian set down the paper he was holding. "Dorian doesn't need to be sent. He moves on his own instinct, and his instinct is very good." "Is he on your list?" Cassian looked at her carefully. "What list?" "The list of people who might have killed my father." A pause. Short, but there. "Everyone is on the list," Cassian said. "That's the problem." Elena stepped into the room and looked at the table. The photographs were surveillance shots. She could tell by the angles, the distance, the poor lighting, faces she didn't recognize. A building she thought she might know. Somewhere in the meatpacking district, she thought, but couldn't be certain. He asked me what our mutual friend's name was, she said. I told him the friend asked to stay anonymous. Good. He didn't believe me. No, Cassian said. He wouldn't. Dorian Vale has not believed anything on first contact in approximately 15 years. He picked up another photograph. What did you think of him? He said liking me was going to make things complicated. It is, Cassian said simply. She looked at him. Do you trust him? Cassian set the photograph down and looked at her with an expression that was the most honest thing she'd seen on his face since she'd arrived. I trust him the way you trust a bridge you've crossed 100 times. You know it holds. You don't know why today might be the day it doesn't. The first dinner was that night. Cassian told her an hour before that 4 of his senior people would be present. He told her their names and 1 or 2 relevant facts about each one, with the brisk efficiency of a man briefing a colleague, not explaining things to a stranger he'd essentially kidnapped. She stopped him midway through. Are you going to tell me which one you suspect most? No. Why not? Because if I tell you, you'll look at them differently, and they'll see it. He looked at her steadily. Right now, the only advantage we have is that you don't know enough to be afraid of the right person. Use that. She thought about pointing out that this was a genuinely terrible thing to say to another human being. She decided against it. The dinner was in a formal room she hadn't seen before. Long table, actual candles, the kind of setting that would have felt theatrical if the people in it weren't so completely at ease with it. Dorian Vale was there, at Cassian's left. Across from him, a woman named Petra Hale, who ran something described vaguely as logistics and had the eyes of someone who slept very well regardless of circumstances. Next to her, a man named Gregor, who was introduced with no title at all, which Elena was learning meant the title was the kind that didn't get said out loud. And at the far end, a man named Sal Enzo, older than the rest, 70s maybe, who had spent the entire pre-dinner period sitting completely still in a chair in the corner, like a piece of furniture that was capable of deciding to stop being furniture. Cassian sat at the head. Elena sat to his right. He didn't touch her. They'd discussed this. Not excessively, just enough. Enough contact to be credible. A hand near the shoulder, her name said with a specific quietness when he addressed her. Nothing performed. She watched all 4 of them across the first course and tried to remember that any one of them might have arranged her father's death. Dorian told a story about a shipping contract gone wrong in a way that made it sound like a comedy, and 3 of the 4 people at the table laughed. Sal Enzo didn't laugh. He watched Elena. She ate her soup and watched him back. You don't look like what I expected, Sal said, during a moment when the other conversations had lulled. What did you expect? Elena asked. Someone younger, he said. Softer. He said it without cruelty, more like he was reading the result of a calculation aloud. Cassian has always had a specific type. Sal, Cassian said. Just the name. Quiet. Sal lifted his hands, a small gesture of retreat, and looked back at his plate. But his eyes came back to Elena twice more during the meal, each time with that same quality. Not threatening, not warm, just evaluating. The look of someone who has been in a business long enough to know that everything new is either an opportunity or a threat, and the difference matters enormously. After the main course, Petra Hale leaned across the table toward Elena and asked pleasantly where she'd gone to school. Elena told her. Finance? Petra said. Cassian mentioned you had a background in accounting. He mentioned that to you? We talk, Petra said with a small smile. He mentioned you might be useful in some of our more complex financial arrangements. Elena felt the back of her neck go cold. She kept her face completely easy. I'm sure I could look at whatever you need. Wonderful. Petra refilled her own wine glass, unhurried. I'll put together some materials. After dinner, in the hallway, Cassian stopped beside her for just a moment. She's testing whether you actually have accounting skills, he said quietly. If you don't, she'll know the backstory is constructed. I have accounting skills, Elena said. He looked at her. My father taught me, she said. Double-entry bookkeeping, forensic trail analysis, the works. He said everyone should know how money actually moves. She paused. I'm starting to understand why. The second day was quieter on the surface and considerably more dangerous underneath. Elena found the discrepancy by accident. Cassian had given her access to a secondary office, not his main workspace, a smaller room with a laptop that had been cleared of anything sensitive, he said, and a set of financial documents he wanted her to look over for what he described as irregularities. She suspected it was partly a test of its own. She didn't mind tests. She went through the documents methodically, the way her father had taught her, not looking for anything specific, just looking, letting the patterns emerge the way they did if you didn't force them. The documents were 3 years of operating accounts for a series of holding companies, all legitimate on the surface, all structured with the kind of excessive complexity that advertises its own desire not to be examined. She found it in the third year's Q2 records. A transfer. $40,000, moving between 2 of the holding companies, neither of which should have had any operational relationship with the other. Unremarkable amount. The kind of number that doesn't trigger automatic flags. But the date was wrong. The transfer had processed on a Saturday, and these particular companies ran their settlements on business days only. She could see the pattern across 3 years, consistent as a heartbeat. Someone had made a Saturday transfer and either hadn't known about the settlement schedule or had been in enough of a hurry not to care. She wrote down the account numbers and the date on a piece of paper and put it in her pocket. She did not put it into the laptop. She was trying to find Cassian when she heard the voices. She'd come down the back stairwell. The building had 2, and she'd been using the secondary one because it came out closer to his workroom. And she stopped 2 steps above the landing when she heard the specific tone of a conversation not meant to be overheard. Dorian's voice. Low, controlled, but with an edge in it she hadn't heard at dinner. Can't wait another 72 hours. We move before... Then another voice, one she didn't recognize. Male, older, deliberate. You don't set the timeline. If she's already found something, then we adjust. A pause. Is she contained? She's not a prisoner. That's not what I asked. Silence. Then Dorian, quieter. Cassian trusts her. Cassian, the other voice said, with a flatness that reduced the name to something smaller than it was, has trusted people before. We know how that ends. Elena pressed herself against the wall of the stairwell and breathed through her nose, slow and shallow, and did not move. The watch, Dorian said. Does she have it? She had it when she arrived. Then we need it before she understands what it is. She may already... Then we need it today. More silence, the kind that means decisions being made. Elena took one careful step back up the stairwell, then another, and then she turned and went back the way she'd come as quietly as her borrowed shoes would allow. She did not run. Running made sound. She walked, and she counted her own heartbeats, and she got back to the office and sat down in the chair and looked at the laptop screen and breathed. Dorian Vale knew about the watch, which meant Dorian Vale knew what the watch was, which meant Dorian Vale had been looking for it for 14 months. She reached into her pocket and closed her hand around it. Still there, still ticking. She thought about her father choosing this watch, having those 14 digits engraved under the manufacturer's mark, handing it to her at her graduation dinner and saying, "Your grandfather's, he'd want you to have it." And she understood something that hit her low and hard in the chest. Her father had not chosen the watch because it was safe. He'd chosen it because if they ever found it, the last person they'd believe had the key was his daughter. She was the hiding place. She'd always been the hiding place. She found Cassian in his workroom and she closed the door behind her and told him what she'd heard, word for word, the way her father had taught her to report things. Facts first, interpretation after, clearly labeled as such. Cassian listened without interrupting. His face did not change. She watched his jaw tighten once, barely, and then go still again. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The second voice, he said, older, deliberate. He didn't use Dorian's name. Dorian didn't use his. Described deliberate. Like every word was chosen, not because he was nervous, because he was used to being precise. Cassian turned away from her and looked at the wall of photographs. She watched him scan them the way you watch someone doing math in their head, following the work even though you can't see the numbers. I need you to do something, he said, and I need you to do it tonight, in front of all 4 of them. What? He turned back. I need you to tell them you found an irregularity in the Q2 accounts. She stared at him. You want me to tell them? Yes. Dorian will know I'm... Dorian already knows you're looking, Cassian said. What I need to know is who panics, who goes still, who looks at who. He held her eyes. I need to close the circle, Elena. I need to know which of those four people is in that stairwell conversation, and I can't know without pressure. She looked at him. At the steadiness of him, which she was learning was not the same as calm. It was something more like a controlled burn, everything directed, nothing wasted. You're using me as bait, she said. I'm using the information as bait. You're the one who holds it. That's a meaningfully small distinction. Yes, he said. It is. I'm sorry. She hadn't expected the apology. It landed wrong, which probably meant it was genuine. She thought about the voice in the stairwell. Is she contained? If I do this, she said, and whoever it is decides they need the watch before tonight is over. They won't move on you here, Cassian said. Not in this building. Too many witnesses. They'll wait until there's an opportunity outside. And then we have a charity gala in 4 days. Something moved in Cassian's expression. Yes, he said quietly. Then we have the gala. Elena looked at the table, at the photographs, at the careful, terrible architecture of a situation she had walked into soaking wet at 2 a.m. and could no longer walk back out of. She reached into her pocket, took out the watch, set it on the table face up, the hand still moving, the 14 digits on the back carrying 11 years of her father's careful, dangerous work. She looked at Cassian. Tonight, she said, I'll tell them about the Q2 accounts. She picked the watch back up and put it in her pocket. And then we find out who my father's killer is. Cassian held her eyes for a long moment, and in that moment, in the flatness of the afternoon light coming through the high windows, Elena Vera understood with complete clarity that she had passed some invisible threshold, that the woman who'd been dragged out of the rain 40 hours ago had made a choice somewhere in the last 2 days without fully recognizing it as a choice, and that choice had just closed behind her like a door with no handle on the inside. There was no version of the next 4 days that ended with her simply leaving. She was in this now, all the way down. And the man across from her, who had spent 15 years making the entire underworld afraid of his name, looked at her with something in his eyes she hadn't seen there before. Not gratitude, not strategy, something quieter and considerably more complicated than either. He picked up the watch before she could pocket it again, turned it over, looked at the numbers, set it back in her palm, and closed her fingers around it, his hand over hers for exactly 3 seconds. Don't let it out of your sight, he said. Then he stepped back, and the moment closed, and they both pretended it hadn't happened. But it had. The dinner that evening was set for 8 o'clock, and by 7:40, Elena had changed clothes twice, not out of vanity, out of the specific nervous energy of a person preparing to do something that cannot be undone. She settled on a dark blouse and the kind of composed expression she'd learned from watching her father absorb bad news at the dinner table. He'd had a way of making his face go neutral that she'd always thought was cold when she was young. Now she understood it was armor, and she was grateful he'd modeled it so thoroughly. Cassian met her at the top of the stairs. He looked at her once, quickly, the way he looked at things he was assessing rather than admiring. Ready? It wasn't a question. No, she said. Good, he said. Overconfident people make mistakes. They went down together. What? The four of them were already at the table when Cassian and Elena entered. Dorian, Petra, Gregor, Sal. The same configuration as the night before, the same candles, a different menu. Elena noted that Sal Enzo had changed his seat slightly, angling it so that his back was not fully to the door. She filed that away. The first 20 minutes were unremarkable. Conversation moved across the surface of things. A shipping delay Petra was annoyed about. A municipal election Gregor had opinions on. Dorian telling another story that was probably constructed to appear careless and wasn't. Elena ate and listened and let Cassian handle the weight of the conversation the way she'd seen capable people let others do the physical labor, conserving their own energy for the moment that counted. She waited until the plates from the first course were being cleared. Then she said quietly, to no one in particular, I found something this afternoon. In the Q2 accounts. The table didn't go silent. It went a specific kind of not silent, where the existing sounds continued. The server moving plates, someone's glass being set down. But the air changed. She kept her eyes on her water glass and described it plainly. The transfer. The date. The account numbers, which she'd memorized and recited without looking at the paper still in her pocket. She kept her voice in the register of a person reporting a minor administrative finding, not a person who'd spent the afternoon reconstructing the nervous system of a criminal empire. When she finished, she looked up. Petra Hale's face was attentive, professionally interested, nothing more. Gregor was looking at his plate. Sal Enzo was looking at Dorian. Dorian Vale was looking at Elena, and the expression on his face was the most frightening thing she'd seen in this building. Not because it was threatening, but because it was perfectly, completely blank. Every other time she'd seen Dorian, there had been something running underneath the surface, something warm or calculating or amused. Now there was nothing. The lights were on and nobody was home, and that absence was the loudest thing in the room. "Which accounts?" he asked. His voice was normal, pleasant even. She gave him the numbers. He nodded, slowly. "I'll look at it tomorrow." "Of course," Elena said. She picked up her fork and went back to her food, and across the table Sal Enzo looked away from Dorian and back at his own plate. And she felt, rather than heard, something shift in the room, some arrangement of forces adjusting around a new variable. Under the table, her hand found the watch in her pocket. Still there. Still ticking. After dinner, Cassian was in the hallway for 4 minutes, talking to Gregor about something she couldn't hear. She used those 4 minutes to go to the library and stand at the window and breathe. The city below was doing what it always did. Indifferent, enormous, continuing. She pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist and counted. Elevated, but functional. Her father had taught her that too. When you're scared, count something real. It puts you back in your body. She heard the library door and turned, expecting Cassian. It was Dorian. He closed the door behind him. Not hard, not soft. Just closed it. "That was well done," he said. "The account numbers. You recited them from memory." "I have a good memory." "You do." He crossed to the window and stood beside her, looking out. Not at her, at the city. "Your father had a good memory too. I always admired that about him." Elena went very still. "You knew my father," she said. "I knew who he was." He turned to look at her then, and the blankness from the dinner table was gone, replaced by something she couldn't immediately name, something tired almost and complicated in the way of things that have been complicated for a long time. "I was very careful. The most careful person I'd ever seen work. 11 years and never a single visible mistake." "Until the last one," Elena said. Dorian looked at her. "He didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. He decided to protect you instead of the ledger." A pause. "He told someone what the key was. Not what it was hidden in, just that you had it, and that someone—" Dorian stopped. "Told the wrong person," Elena finished. "Yes." The room was quiet. Outside, a siren moved through the distance and faded. "Was that person you?" she asked. Dorian Vale looked at her for a long time, long enough that she understood the answer was not simple, which meant it was not no. "Not the way you mean," he said finally. "I didn't know what would happen. I didn't—" He stopped again, and she saw something move across his face that looked like the specific pain of a decision you've made and unmade 1,000 times in your head without being able to change the outcome. "I was approached, 8 months before Marcus died, by someone who told me the ledger existed and that Marcus was a liability. They said they just wanted to know where he'd hidden the access. I told them I didn't know, which was the truth." "But you confirmed the ledger was real." Dorian said nothing. "You confirmed it was real," Elena said again, "and that was enough." He turned back to the window. "I've been trying to identify who gave the order since the day Marcus died," he said. "I haven't told Cassian because Cassian is on your list of suspects too," Elena said. Dorian looked at her sharply. "You said everyone is on your list," she said. "That's what I heard in the stairwell. Does she have it? You weren't asking someone to take it from me. You were asking how much danger I was already in." Dorian was quiet for a long moment. "You heard more than I thought," he said. "I heard enough." She looked at him. "Who was in that stairwell with you?" "Someone who asked me to find the watch before whoever killed Marcus found you first." He held her eyes. "Someone who has been working this problem from a direction Cassian doesn't know about." "Give me a name." "Not yet," Dorian said. "Not here. Too many ears in this building." He straightened, moved toward the door, then stopped. The charity gala. 4 days, don't go. Elena frowned. Cassian says, I know what Cassian says. I'm telling you, don't go. He put his hand on the door. Your father's death was arranged by someone who will be in that room, and they already know the watch exists. They've known for 8 months. He opened the door. If Cassian is who I hope he is, Dorian said quietly, then everything works out. But if I'm wrong about him... He looked back at her once, and the tiredness in his face was genuine in the way of things that have been carried too long. If I'm wrong about him, the gala is where you disappear. He left. Elena stood at the window with the city below her and the watch in her hand, and Dorian Vale's words rearranging themselves in her chest, like furniture being moved in a dark room. If she was wrong about Cassian. She turned the watch over, looked at the 14 digits, her father's handwriting in the engraving, careful and small. If Dorian was right. If she was wrong. Oh, she did not sleep again that night. She lay in the dark and reconstructed everything from the beginning. Every conversation, every pause, every moment where Cassian had not answered a direct question, and she'd accepted the non-answer because the overall shape of things had seemed to make sense. She tested each piece the way you test ice, pressing slowly, listening for the sound that tells you how much it will hold. The marriage certificate, prepared months before he'd met her. Someone had been preparing Elena for this role long before she knew Cassian existed. Her father, assigned to dismantle the Serrano Empire from the inside. Cassian had said, your father helped me. But what if the direction was reversed? What if her father had approached Cassian, not the other way around? What if her father had been working his own agenda all along, and Cassian had been the one recruited, and the ledger wasn't a tool of Cassian's operation, but a leash? What if Cassian's urgency to find it wasn't about protecting himself from the traitor inside his ranks? What if it was about finding the one document capable of destroying him? She pressed harder on that piece of ice and listened. It held. She didn't know if that meant it was solid or just that she hadn't found the right spot yet. At 4 in the morning, she got up, dressed, went down to the secondary office, and opened the laptop. She searched for the transfer she'd found in the Q2 accounts. She dug deeper this time, past the holding companies, back through the previous 2 years, looking for the pattern underneath the pattern. What she'd described at dinner was real. It was an irregularity, but it wasn't what she'd actually found. What she'd actually found was underneath it, a series of microtransactions, fractional amounts spread across 18 months, always between companies with no apparent relationship. Individually invisible. Assembled. A systematic drain, $11 million, moving through the structure so slowly and carefully that it would never trip an automated alert. She traced the receiving end. The money was landing in an account she didn't recognize, structured through a shell in Delaware that linked to a real estate management company in Connecticut that was owned by a holding trust whose registered agent was... She stopped. Read the name again. A political consulting firm. Prestigious, legitimate, the kind of organization that got quoted in newspapers and testified to congressional committees. Partners listed on their public website. Senior partners. One name she recognized, Senator Arthur Delaney. She'd seen his photograph in Cassian's workroom, she realized. Not prominently, not pinned with string and labeled, just in a stack of other photographs, somewhere in the middle. The kind of position that meant either low priority or very careful concealment. Arthur Delaney was not Cassian's enemy. Arthur Delaney was Cassian's political ally. She remembered Hollis mentioning it, casually, the second afternoon. The senator's office sends cars when Cassian testifies. And she'd let it pass as context. She looked at the money moving into Delaney's trust, and the money moving out of Cassian's holding companies, and the dates, and the careful invisible architecture of it, and she understood something that was so large and so quiet that for a moment she simply sat with it, not moving, letting it finish arriving. Arthur Delaney wasn't being paid off by Cassian. Arthur Delaney was extracting payment from Cassian's operation, had been for 18 months, and doing it through a financial structure so complex and patient that even Cassian's own people hadn't found it, because Cassian's own people were the ones moving the money. She was in Cassian's workroom at 5:45 in the morning with the laptop and her notes and the kind of exhausted focus that comes from running on no sleep and very high stakes. She laid it out for him the same way she'd laid out the Q2 finding, facts first, interpretation after. When she finished, Cassian didn't speak for almost a full minute. He stood at his table and looked at her notes, and she watched him process it the way she'd watched him process everything. Inward, controlled, nothing leaking until he'd finished deciding what it meant. "Delaney," he said, "your ally." "For 11 years. 11 years, Elena said. "The same 11 years my father was building the ledger." Another silence. "If Delaney has been extracting from the operation for 18 months, Cassian said slowly, "and the ledger contains the full financial architecture, then the ledger exposes him," Elena said. "Not just your enemies. Him, your ally, the man with federal oversight connections, and a legitimate public profile in 11 years of relationship with your organization." Cassian looked up from the notes. "He's not protecting himself from the ledger," she said. "He's been trying to find it so he can destroy it. Marcus was killed because Marcus built the thing that would end him." The room was very quiet. "And the gala," Cassian said. "Delaney will be there," Elena said. "You told me. You said he always comes." "He co-hosts it." She let that land. "He co-hosts it," she repeated. "And you were planning to take me there, in public, as your wife. The woman who everyone will now know spent a week inside your organization." Cassian's jaw tightened. "He's already had 4 days to find out why you brought me here," Elena said. 4 days to ask the right questions of the right people. "And whatever the answer is, he'll want the watch before the gala," Cassian said. "He'll want me gone before the gala." She held his eyes. "Dorian told me last night not to go." Something changed in Cassian's face at that. Sharp, fast, and then controlled again. "Dorian came to you." "In the library, after dinner." "What else did he say?" She told him, all of it. The stairwell, the confirmation that Dorian had inadvertently verified the ledger's existence to someone 8 months before Marcus died. The claim that Dorian had been working the problem from his own direction. She watched Cassian's face while she talked, and she saw the calculation running, rapid and invisible, behind his eyes. When she finished, he said, "Did you believe him?" "I believed he was scared," she said. "That part was real. The rest—" She shook her head. "I don't know." "He told you not to go to the gala." "Yes." "Which means either he's trying to protect you," Cassian said, "or he's trying to keep you away from a room where you'd be close enough to see something he doesn't want you to see." Elena looked at him. "Those are very different things." "Yes, they are." They stood on opposite sides of the table, the notes between them, the city coming up pale and gray outside the window, and Elena felt the full weight of the position she was in. Not just the danger of it, but the epistemological problem at the center of it. She could not trust Dorian. She could not fully trust Cassian. She could not trust any of the 4 people at that dinner table. She was inside a structure where every relationship was load-bearing, and every load-bearing thing was also a potential point of failure. And the only person whose motives she understood completely was her father, and her father was dead. "I'm going to the gala," she said. Cassian looked at her. "Not because you need me to," she said. "Because whoever killed my father will be in that room, and I want to be in the same room when this ends." The gala was in 3 days. Day 2 passed with the surface tension of a lake in wind, everything moving, nothing breaking, the pressure underneath enormous. Petra Hale sent the financial materials she'd promised, and Elena spent 6 hours working through them with the focus she'd inherited from her father. And she found nothing in Petra's accounts because Petra, whatever else she was, ran an immaculate operation. She told Cassian this, and he said nothing, which told her Petra was not who he was watching most carefully. Hollis took her to an appointment across town. Not explained, just a car, and a route, and a building she was brought into and introduced to a woman named Dr. Anand, who examined her without comment and gave her a small device she was told to keep in her pocket. "It sends a signal," Hollis said, in the car back. "One button, don't lose it." She asked who would receive the signal. Hollis said, "People who will come." She thought about asking for more detail and decided the answer would be either comforting or terrifying, and she wasn't sure she had room for either. Day 3. The watch never left her body. She slept with it in her hand, woke with the imprint of the crown on her palm. She dreamed about her father's kitchen table, the 2 of them sitting across from each other with paperwork between them. Her father explaining the concept of a shell company using the salt and pepper shakers as examples, while her teenage self rolled her eyes and thought about literally anything else. She woke up from that dream at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark and thought, He was teaching me. Not in the abstract sense, not just instilling a skill. He was teaching her specifically, deliberately, the exact skills she would need to read his ledger. He'd known, she realized. Not that she'd end up in Cassian Rook's building 15 years later, but that the knowledge would matter. That she might one day need to follow the money. He'd given her the tools and the watch and positioned her as the hiding place and trusted that if the time ever came, she'd be able to finish what he'd started. The thought was enormous and heavy and something else underneath, something that felt, in the specific logic of 3 in the morning, like being held. The morning of the gala, everything went wrong before breakfast. Elena came downstairs at 7 to find the front 2 rooms of the building occupied by people she hadn't seen before. Not Cassian's regular staff, different faces, harder and more alert. The kind of faces that appear when the situation has escalated past normal operations into something else. She found Hollis in the kitchen. "What happened?" she said. It wasn't a question. Hollis looked at her with his imperfect, tired face and said, "Gregor is dead." The kitchen was cold. "When?" "They found him an hour ago. His apartment." Hollis poured coffee into a cup and set it on the counter in front of her. "It's being handled." "Handled," she said. "Cassian is—" "Where is he, Elena, where?" Hollis took her to the workroom. Cassian was there with 2 men she didn't know, and a phone he was speaking into in a voice so low and controlled it barely registered as sound. He looked at her when she came in. He ended the call. The 2 men left. "Gregor," she said. "Yes." "Who?" "We don't know yet." "Was it Delaney?" Cassian moved to the table. He picked up a photograph and set it down again. She could see his hands were not entirely steady, which was the first uncontrolled physical thing she'd seen from him, and it frightened her more than anything else that had happened. "Gregor came to me yesterday evening," Cassian said, "after you went upstairs. He told me he'd found something. He said he needed 1 more day to verify it before he could give me a name." "He had a name," Elena said. "He had half a name. He was careful. He didn't want to give me something unverified." Cassian stopped. "He was careful, and it still—" He stopped again. She understood then that Gregor had not just been an employee. She understood it from the way Cassian stood, from the specific quality of his stillness, which was different from his normal stillness, in a way that made her chest ache. "I'm sorry," she said. He didn't acknowledge it, which she thought was because acknowledging it would cost more than he could afford right now. "We're still going tonight," he said. "Cassian, we're going." He looked at her. "Whoever did this did it to scare us off, to keep us out of that room. If we don't show, they win, and we learn nothing, and Gregor died for nothing." His voice stayed level, but the word nothing at the end of it had weight she felt in her back teeth. "We go. We stay together. And if Delaney makes a move, we have the evidence already copied and staged for release." He paused. "You did copy it." Elena met his eyes. "Last night," she said. 3 copies. 3 different places." Something in Cassian's face shifted. Just barely. Just for a second. "Your father's daughter," he said, and it was the first thing he'd said since she'd arrived that sounded like something he hadn't decided to say. The gala was a charity event at a restored theater on the Upper West Side. The Aldwyn, a place Elena had walked past 100 times without ever going in. It was the kind of building that looked more expensive at night, lit from below, the old stonework catching the light and throwing it back warmer and older than it was. They arrived at 9. Elena wore something black that Cassian's staff had produced without her asking, and she had the watch on a chain inside her dress against her skin, and the small device from Dr. Anand in the inside pocket of an evening bag she'd been handed at the car, and she walked into the Aldwyn on Cassian Rook's arm, feeling, for the first time, that the performance of wife was indistinguishable from the reality of a person simply trying to survive the next several hours. The room was full. Politicians, attorneys, the specific faces of legitimacy that money buys and proximity to power polishes. Elena scanned it the way her father had taught her to scan financial documents, not looking for anything specific, just letting the patterns emerge. She found Arthur Delaney in 12 seconds. He was not what she'd expected, which she was learning to stop being surprised by. He was 70, maybe, small and neat, with silver hair and the kind of face that appeared on the right kinds of boards and in the right kinds of photographs. He was talking to a woman in a blue dress, and he was laughing at something she'd said, and the laugh was warm and easy and completely, entirely real. She looked at a man who had ordered her father's death, and she felt something move through her that was not fear and was not anger, but was something in between, something colder and more durable than either. "He sees us," Cassian said, very quietly, beside her. She looked. Delaney had glanced across the room. Not obviously, just a sweep, the natural behavior of someone monitoring a space, and his eyes had found them and moved on. "He knows," Elena said. "He's known since we walked in." Cassian's hand moved to the small of her back, the first time he touched her in a way that wasn't functional. "Don't look at him again. Let him come to us." They moved into the room. They spoke to people. Elena followed Cassian's lead, stayed present, stayed composed. She accepted a glass of champagne she didn't drink. She listened to a man describe a waterfront development project and responded with the correct amount of interest. She was somewhere else entirely, tracking Delaney in her peripheral vision, watching him work the room with the practiced ease of a man who had done this exact thing 10,000 times. He reached them at 9:47. "Cassian," he said, with warmth that was indistinguishable from genuine. "You actually came. I wasn't sure after—" He paused, something passing across his face. "After this morning. My condolences about Gregor. He was a good man." "He was," Cassian said. Delaney looked at Elena. "And this must be—" "My wife," Cassian said. Delaney smiled. "Of course. I'd heard." He extended his hand to Elena and she shook it, and his hand was warm and dry and steady, and he looked at her with complete attentive pleasantness. "Elena, what a lovely name. Were you close to Gregor?" "I only met him once," Elena said. "He seemed like someone you could trust." Something moved behind Delaney's eyes. Fast, barely visible, like a fish under dark water. "Rare quality," he said pleasantly, "especially in Cassian's world." He looked back at Cassian. "We should find time to talk tonight. There's something I've been meaning to—" The gunshot was not loud. That was the first strange thing. It was not the movie sound, not the crack she'd expected. It was a flat, muffled report from somewhere above them. The balcony level, she thought, though later she wouldn't be sure. And then the glass in her hand was gone because Cassian had knocked it aside and his body was between her and the direction the sound had come from, and the room was erupting around them. That specific human chaos of a crowd that has heard something alarming and not yet agreed on what to do about it. Delaney was still standing exactly where he'd been. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. He stood in the spreading chaos with his champagne glass in his hand, and he looked at Elena, and for the first time since she'd found him across the room, the pleasantness was gone. What was underneath it was not anger, it was patience. The patience of a man who has been managing situations like this for 40 years, and knows that the first moment of chaos is not the time to act, but the time to let others reveal themselves. "The photograph," he said, very quietly, in a space under the noise of the crowd, looking at Elena. Not Cassian. "Elena. Your mother and my father. You've seen it." She hadn't. She didn't know what he was talking about. But she understood, from the way he said it, from the way his eyes held hers without blinking, that he believed she had, and that belief was the most dangerous thing in the room. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Yes, you do," Delaney said softly. "And so does the man standing behind you." He looked at Cassian for just a moment, and the look was not threatening and not warm. It was the look of a man closing a long account. "This isn't about the ledger, Cassian. It was never about the ledger." He looked back at Elena. "It's about what was decided before either of you were old enough to understand what was being decided." Cassian's hand was on her arm, pulling her back, the crowd pressing in around them. "We need to move," Cassian said in her ear. Elena pulled against him. "What photograph? What is he talking about?" "Now," Cassian said, and his voice had the flat urgency of someone who has just run out of time. She let him move her. They went through the crowd and through a side door and into a corridor that ran behind the main hall, and Hollis was there with two of the new faces from that morning, and they moved fast through the building's back passages, while Elena's mind ran the last 30 seconds on repeat. Delaney's face, Delaney's patience, Delaney's voice saying, "Your mother and my father." She grabbed Cassian's arm and stopped him. "What photograph?" she said. He stopped, looked at her. She could see in his face that he knew, had known. And the thing she felt then, the specific sensation of a floor you believed was solid revealing itself as something else, was not betrayal exactly, because betrayal requires surprise. And somewhere underneath her chest, she thought maybe she had known too, in the way you know things you're not ready to look at directly. "There's a photograph," he said, "of our parents, together, taken 22. Your mother and my father ran an operation together before either of them had families, before the Serrano Empire, before any of this." He held her eyes. "Elena, how long have you known?" "Long enough." "How long?" "Before I arranged the marriage." The corridor was dim and smelled like old wood, and somewhere above them people were still in controlled chaos, the sounds muffled now by the building's mass. Elena stood in that dim corridor and looked at the man she had spent 5 days with and understood, with the terrible clarity of information that has finally assembled itself into a shape you can see, that she had not been brought into this story as a stranger. She had been in it from the beginning, before she was born. She pulled her arm from his hand. "You knew who I was," she said. "Not just that my father worked for you. You knew our families were connected. You knew what Delaney knew. And you let me stand in that room just now without telling me that the man we were talking to had a reason to want you dead that had nothing to do with the ledger," Cassian said. "Yes." She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them moved. "The ledger," she said. "My father's ledger. Does it contain what I think it contains?" "Yes," Cassian said, "and more. Including the connection between your family and mine." He didn't answer. Which was the answer? She reached inside her dress and pulled his watch from the chain and held it in her fist, and she looked at this man who had prepared a marriage certificate months before meeting her, who had known the architecture of her life better than she had, who had moved her into position the way her father had moved money, carefully, invisibly, with patience. And she made a decision, not a choice she arrived at through reasoning, a decision that was simply there, fully formed, the way certain things become clear when there is no longer any alternative to clarity. She was not going to give him the watch. She was not going to run. She was going to finish this herself. Not for Cassian, not even for her father, for the woman who had spent 34 years being the hiding place for everyone else's most important secrets, and had never once been told she was carrying them. Somewhere above them, through the building's old bones, she heard the sound of more footsteps. Not panicked crowd footsteps, something more organized, something moving with purpose toward a specific destination. And Hollis said, very quietly, "We have a problem." And the lights in the corridor went out. The lights did not come back. For 3 seconds, the corridor was absolute black, the kind of dark that presses against your eyes and makes you uncertain whether they're open. And Elena heard her own breathing and Hollis's breathing and the shuffle of the two men repositioning themselves. And then Cassian's hand found her arm in the dark. Not grabbing, just locating, a firm point of contact that said, "I know where you are." And something small and bright appeared. A phone screen, one of the men, enough light to move by. "Stairs," Hollis said. "Down." They moved. The corridor sloped toward a stairwell Elena hadn't seen on the way in, service access, the kind of passage that exists in old buildings like this one. Because old buildings were built with the understanding that the people who maintained them should be invisible. The walls were unfinished brick, and the stairs were metal industrial, and they went down 2 flights fast and came out into a sublevel that smelled like dust and old electrical work and something faintly chemical she couldn't identify. Cassian had not let go of her arm. She had not pulled away, which was its own kind of decision, one she didn't examine too closely while her heart was running at the pace it was running. "How many?" Cassian said to Hollis, low, moving. "At least 6 came through the east entrance, maybe more from the roof access." "Delaney's? Or someone who works for Delaney?" Hollis checked something on his phone and made a sound she didn't like. "The exits are covered. Street level is compromised." "The theater's sub-basement," Cassian said. "There's a passage. Old utility tunnel. Runs under the block to the parking structure on 72nd. "You know this building?" Elena said. "I've known this building for 3 years." She didn't ask why, because she was starting to understand that Cassian Rook knew the exits of every room he ever entered before he walked through the door, and that this quality, which might elsewhere be called paranoia, was in this specific context called survival. They moved deeper into the sublevel. The sub-basement was everything the floors above were not, raw and unrestored. The Aldwin's bones exposed, old plumbing running overhead in configurations that suggested several different decades of renovation piled on top of each other. The phone screen made shadows that jumped and confused. Elena kept one hand on the brick wall and moved fast and tried not to think about what the 14 digits in her dress meant to the men above them. She thought about it anyway. "The photograph Delaney mentioned," she said, quiet, to Cassian's back. "Our parents. What happened between them?" "Not now." "Yes, now. While we're moving and there's no one to perform for." She kept her voice down. "What happened?" Cassian moved around a low-hanging pipe without slowing. 23 years ago, my father and your mother ran a joint operation to bring down a money laundering network connected to 3 different crime families. They were both inside it as informants, not for law enforcement, for a competing organization that wanted the network dismantled. They succeeded. The network collapsed. He paused, took a corner. 2 people died in the process. People who were not supposed to die. Who? Delaney's father and his business partner. The sub-basement was getting warmer, the air closer. Elena's dress was wrong for this, the fabric catching on things, but she kept moving. Delaney's father was in the network, she said, running it. He'd built it over 20 years. When my father and your mother brought it down, they took him with it. A short pause. He died in federal custody 6 months later. And Delaney has known this since he was old enough to look into his father's case. He spent the next 15 years building influence, not to prosecute them, to position himself to destroy everything they'd built and everyone connected to them. Elena processed that, kept moving. Your empire. Your father built it in the years after. On the foundation of the network they'd dismantled. Yes. And my father. Marcus came in later. He didn't know the full history when he started. When he found out, Cassian stopped walking for just a moment, just one beat, then resumed. When he found out, he started building the ledger. Not for me, for himself. Insurance. A record of everything, including the origin of the money. Including what your father and my mother did. Yes. Elena thought about her mother, a woman she'd grown up knowing as quiet, competent, private in the way of people who have done things they've made their peace with. She thought about her mother's face at her father's funeral, the dry-eyed steadiness of it, which Elena had read then as shock and was now recalibrating as something else. The specific composure of someone who has already grieved in private for things that can't be spoken aloud. My mother is still alive, Elena said. Yes. Delaney knows where she is. Yes. Cassian's voice was flat, which is why she has been under protective arrangement for the past 6 weeks, without her knowledge. Elena stopped walking. The 2 men behind her nearly collided with her. Hollis looked back. You've been protecting my mother, Elena said, for 6 weeks. Cassian stopped and turned. In the bad light of the phone screen, his face was half shadow. Since I confirmed Delaney was the source, since I understood the full scope of what he wanted. He looked at her steadily. She doesn't know who's watching her. She thinks it's a standard security arrangement through her building. Elena looked at him. She thought about trust and what it was made of. She thought about her father's careful, patient architecture of protection. And she thought about the man in front of her who had done the same thing in the same way, quietly, without announcing it, without asking for credit. She started walking again. When this is over, she said, you're going to tell her. Yes, he said. Everything. A pause. Yes. They kept moving. Pensad. The tunnel entrance was behind a utility door that required a key Cassian produced from inside his jacket, which told her he'd been carrying it all evening and that this evening had been planned for more contingencies than he'd shared with her beforehand. She filed that away for later because later was a thing she was committed to reaching. The tunnel was narrow and low-ceilinged and ran in a straight line with the specific purposeful geometry of infrastructure. No curves, no concessions to aesthetics, just function moving point to point under the city. Cassian went first, Elena second, Hollis and the 2 men behind. About 40 meters in, Hollis's phone buzzed. He looked at it and said, They're in the sublevel. How many? 4 confirmed, probably more. They found the stairwell, Cassian said. Not a question. Someone talked, Hollis said. It came out flat, just information, but Elena heard the weight in it. Someone on their side had given up the route. Cassian turned and looked at Hollis for 2 seconds. "How far out is our support?" he said. 8 minutes. Then we move faster. They move faster. Elena's shoes were wrong for this too, and she kicked them off after the third stumble and went in her stockings on the concrete floor and didn't think about it. The tunnel was not perfectly straight, she realized. It curved slightly, long, gentle arcs she hadn't noticed at first, and there were branching passages at 2 points, both gated, both locked. Cassian ignored them. Behind them, a sound. Not close, but not far enough. Voices, and then a light source. Not the small, intimate glow of a phone, but something bigger, a flashlight, moving fast. Run, Cassian said. They ran. What? The tunnel opened into a utility room beneath the parking structure, and it was not empty. There were 2 men waiting, and Elena's first thought, which she was ashamed of for approximately a quarter of a second, was that they were Cassian's people, that this was the support Hollis had mentioned, and then the larger of the 2 moved, and she understood from the way he moved, from the economy of it, from the direction he was moving, that they were not. Cassian took the first one before Elena had fully processed the situation. Not smoothly, not the choreographed thing you saw in films, but fast and brutal and functional. The man's flashlight swinging wide, and then the 2 of them against the wall and something cracking, and then Cassian stepping back and the man staying where he was. The second one had Hollis. Elena did not think. She reached into her evening bag and her hand found the device from Dr. Anand and she pressed the button. One press. Hard. And then she did the other thing. The thing her body decided on before her mind caught up. She moved toward the struggle, not away from it, and she hit the man across the back of the head with the only thing she had, which was the empty champagne flute she'd been carrying, inexplicably, since the gala, having pocketed it without thinking at some moment in the chaos. The flute didn't break. It connected solidly with the base of his skull, and he lurched, and Hollis got a hand free, and the situation resolved itself in about 4 more seconds in a way she didn't watch closely. Then they were through, up a ramp, through a door, into the concrete exhaust-smelling dark of the parking structure's lowest level, and ahead of them she could see the yellow glow of the entrance level, the city beyond it, the orange-yellow of streetlights. Behind them, from the tunnel, more voices. They reached the street. The car came from the left, moving fast, and Elena had 1/2 second of pure visceral terror before it pulled up, and the driver was one of Cassian's people, a young woman she'd seen twice at the building, and they got in and the car moved immediately, not waiting, pulling into traffic with the particular aggression of someone for whom traffic laws are guidelines. Elena sat in the back between Cassian and the door. Her feet were bleeding. She noticed this with a kind of distant administrative interest. The concrete in the tunnel had been rougher than she'd registered while moving through it. Cassian looked down at her feet and his expression did something she hadn't seen it do before. It did not harden or recalibrate. It just stopped, briefly. Became something ordinary. "There's a kid under the seat," he said. "I know." She didn't reach for it. "Tell me the rest." "The rest?" Delaney said it was never about the ledger. "What is it about?" Cassian looked out the window. The city moved past, indifferent, glittering. "The ledger is evidence, but Delaney's actual goal is the same one he's had for 15 years. He wants the Rook organization ended, not prosecuted, ended. The money, the network, the influence, all of it redistributed to his own structure." He paused. "The ledger would take him down with us. That's why he wants it destroyed. But the primary objective is the empire." "Your empire? What's left of it?" Elena looked at him. "You said you'd walk away from it." He looked back at her. "I said what I said." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The car moved through the city, and Elena reached under the seat for the kit and opened it and started dealing with her feet in the way of someone who has decided that getting functional again is more important than processing the pain of becoming that way. Her phone buzzed. She'd forgotten she had it. A text from a number she didn't know. The theater. They found what was left under the stage. You know what that means. She showed it to Cassian. He read it once and looked up. "Who sent this?" "I don't know." He passed it to Hollis in the front seat. Hollis looked at it. "The number is Dorian's secondary." "Dorian," Elena said. "He said the theater, under the stage." Cassian said, "The ledger archive. One of the 3 servers. Marcus hid a physical node somewhere in this city, and I've been trying to locate it for 14 months. He looked at her. Under the stage of a theater. Of the Aldwin, Elena said. Of the Aldwin, he repeated, and his voice had the particular quality of a man realizing he has been inside the answer for an hour without knowing it. We just ran through it, she said. We just ran through it. A pause. And Delaney's people are in there right now, she said. With access to a server they can't open without the sequence from the watch. He looked at her, which they don't have. Yet. The word sat between them. She reached into her dress and found the chain and pulled the watch out. It was warm from her body heat and still running, the second hand making its steady, indifferent progress. If they access the server, she said, and they can't open it, they'll destroy it. Yes. Which means the archive is gone even if we have the sequence. Yes. She looked at the watch. At the 14 digits her father had pressed into the metal of it 15 years ago when she was 22 and accepting a graduation gift and thinking about her first job. Then we have to go back, she said. Cassian looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him doing what she'd watched him do since the first morning, calculating, assessing, running scenarios. She watched him reach the end of the calculation. Yes, he said, we do. He leaned forward and said something to the driver, and the car shifted lanes and turned and went back the way it had come. They came in through a different entrance. Not the tunnel. That was compromised now, possibly watched at both ends. Instead, Hollis had produced from somewhere in the infrastructure of his phone a building schematic that showed a freight entrance on the west side of the Aldwin, accessible from an alley, used for production load-ins. The lock was electronic, and one of the two men who'd come through the tunnel with them, who Elena was now thinking of simply as the capable one, because she'd watched him work twice now and he never wasted motion, had something in his jacket that dealt with the lock in about 40 seconds. Inside was the backstage of the theater, the working side of the building, catwalks and rigging, and the organized chaos of a space that was both functional and forgotten. The gala was still technically happening somewhere above them. She could hear it, the particular muffled sound of a crowd that had been redirected and reassured and was doing its best to behave normally in the aftermath of a sound no one had officially identified. Under the stage. The access was a trap door, the old kind, counterweighted, the type used for theatrical effects in productions from decades past. Hollis found it by flashlight. Not the center of the stage, but stage right, behind a flat that depicted something classical and faded. The trapdoor opened on a space below the main stage floor, cramped and structural, full of the old mechanisms of a theater that had been doing this for a century. Elena went down first. Cassian made a sound that might have been an objection. I know what I'm looking for, she said. You don't. She went down. The space was roughly 2 meters of clearance, maybe 10 meters square, all counterweights and old cables, and the preserved in amber quality of things that haven't been touched in a long time. She moved the flashlight slowly. Her feet hurt, and she was aware of it now, the adrenaline metabolizing into discomfort, and she breathed through it and looked. Her father. The most important thing in the most ordinary place. She found it in 11 minutes. A server node the size of a hardback book, matte gray, mounted to the underside of a structural beam with the same hardware store brackets you'd use to hang a shelf. No labels. No indicator lights. Plugged into what looked like an old electrical junction. A modification made carefully and some time ago, the kind of work you'd do if you had time to do it right. She heard footsteps above her, not the muffled general crowd sound. Specific footsteps. Moving with purpose. Cassian, she said, quiet. He was already at the trap door looking down at her. I hear it. How long do we have? Not long. He dropped into the space beside her, looked at the node. Can you access it here? I don't know. I need a device. He handed her his phone. I know. He looked at the node at the junction it was connected to. It's networked through the building's system. Modified. He crouched and examined the connection. Your father patched it into the theater's own infrastructure, which means it has a network address. Elena was already looking at the phone, pulling up a browser, because her father had taught her that when in doubt you start with what you have. She looked at the node, at the faint serial marking on its side, and she felt the watch against her breastbone, and she thought about 14 digits and how her father had arranged them. She started typing. Above them, the footsteps stopped. Then the trapdoor opened. The man who came down was not one of Delaney's generic operatives. Elena knew this immediately, without being able to say exactly how she knew it. Something about the way he moved, something about the absence of urgency in it. He came down into the space under the stage the way you enter a room you've been planning to enter for a long time. He was 60, maybe. Gray suit. An unremarkable face that was completely at ease. He looked at Elena, then at Cassian. "Mr. Rook," he said, "I was hoping we'd have a moment." "Harlan," Cassian said, and the name came out flat and stripped of everything. Elena looked at Cassian's face. Whatever she'd expected to see there, recognition, calculation, the controlled burn she'd come to read, what she saw instead was something she hadn't seen before. She saw betrayal land on him, not the abstract strategic version, the human one. "You're not Delaney's man," Cassian said. "I never was," the man named Harlan said. "Arthur Delaney is a useful instrument. Instruments don't run the operation." Cassian was still. The specific stillness that was not calm. "How long?" "Longer than you know." Harlan looked at Elena. "Longer than Marcus knew at the end, which is unfortunate. He was a very thorough man. He almost got there." He looked back at Cassian. "The ledger, the full ledger, not the version you think exists, contains enough to collapse every major operation on this coast, including Delaney, including the Rook organization." He paused. "Including mine." "Yours," Cassian said. "I've been on the other side of your operation for 11 years, Cassian, managing both sides of the underworld, using your organization as a shield. You're so visible, you draw every investigation, every rival, every ambitious prosecutor, while I operate below the line." He said it without pride, just explanation. "Your father and Elena's mother shut down Delaney's father's network. I rebuilt it. Better. And I've had a full structural view of your operation ever since." Elena's hand on the phone. The screen still open, the address field still empty. She looked at the node on the beam. She looked at the watch. She looked at Harlan. "You killed my father," she said. Harlan looked at her with something she recognized after a moment as genuine regret, which was somehow worse than indifference would have been. "I gave the order because I had no choice. Marcus had found the third layer. He was building a case not against the Rook organization, but against the structure behind it." A pause. "Against me?" He was 3 months from having enough. "So you had him killed," she said. "Yes." The word was simple and complete, and she felt it in the same place she'd felt things since the first morning. That low, specific place beneath the sternum that registers the things too large for the chest to hold. "The watch," Harlan said. "I'd like it now, please." "No," Elena said. Harlan looked at her with the patience of someone who has extensive experience in the gap between what people say and what they eventually do. He reached into his jacket. 2 things happened simultaneously. Above them, through the trapdoor, a sound. Multiple sounds, rapid, controlled. The sound of Hollis and the capable one meeting whoever Harlan had brought, and the sound of that meeting going badly for someone. And Elena typed the 14 digits into the address field of the browser and hit enter. Harlan moved. Cassian moved faster. Not elegant, not controlled. The space was too small for anything graceful. It was elbows and the low beam and Cassian's shoulder taking Harlan into the wall, hard enough that dust came down from the old wood above them. And Elena kept her eyes on the phone screen, and the connection spun and then resolved into a login interface, black background, single text field. And she typed the sequence. Not the digits themselves, but the sequence her father had encoded in them. The pattern she'd worked out in the 3 a.m. dark 2 days ago and hadn't told Cassian about because she'd known, somewhere underneath everything, that the day might come when she needed to be the one who held it. Behind her, a sound she didn't look at. The interface accepted the sequence. The archive opened. It was vast. Not what she'd expected. Not a clean document, but a living thing, structured in her father's careful taxonomy. 11 years of interconnected records. And she could see from the first layer that Harlan was right. It was deeper than she'd known. It went past the Rook organization, past Delaney, past every name she recognized into a structure that had been running underneath all of them for over a decade. She found the copy function. She had one upload address she'd staged 2 nights ago, the one she'd told Cassian about. She had two others she hadn't told anyone about. She queued all three. The progress bar appeared. 11%, 12, 13. Elena, Cassian's voice. Strained. She looked. Cassian had Harlan against the wall, but Harlan was not a 60-year-old man in the way she'd first read him. He was a 60-year-old man who had been doing this since before she was born, and he was holding his position, and there was something in his other hand, the one she couldn't see. The phone, Harlan said. He was breathing hard, but his voice was level. Give me the phone, or I stop this right now. 22%. Give it to me, Harlan said. Elena looked at the progress bar, looked at Cassian's face, looked at the man who had ordered her father's death with the specific practical regret of someone clearing an obstacle. 31%. Okay, she said. She hit the sleep button on the phone. The screen went dark. She held it out. Harlan reached for it. She pulled it back 1 inch. Tell me one thing first, she said. My father. At the end. Did he know it was you? Harlan looked at her. The question had landed somewhere. She could see it, the small involuntary contraction around the eyes. Yes, he said. He knew. Did he say anything? A pause that was longer than any pause in the conversation so far. He said he'd already taken care of it, Harlan said quietly. I assumed he meant the ledger. I didn't understand what he meant until now. Elena looked at him. He meant me. 38%. She held the phone out again. Cassian moved, not toward Harlan but sideways, creating an angle, and in the shift of weight, Harlan turned instinctively, and Cassian's elbow connected, and the thing in Harlan's other hand skidded across the floor, and Elena did not watch where it went because she was watching the phone. She'd just dropped face up on the concrete where Harlan couldn't reach it without going through both of them, the progress bar still running, 44%, 45%, and above them the sounds had changed. Different voices now, she thought. The organized, rapid sound she'd first heard described as support. 8 minutes out, and they'd been underground for longer than 8 minutes, she was almost certain. 51%. Harlan looked at the phone on the floor, at Cassian, at Elena. And for the first time since he'd come down through the trapdoor, something crossed his face that was not patience or regret or the practiced ease of a man managing a situation. It was the specific, particular look of someone watching control leave their hands for the first time in 11 years and understanding in real time that it is not coming back. 60%. Cassian, Elena said, without looking away from Harlan. Your support. How many? Enough, Cassian said, and his voice had the quality she'd stopped being frightened by and started being grateful for. The absolute bedrock of a man who has decided exactly what he's doing and is doing it. Harlan looked at the phone. 67%. He looked at Elena. Your father was a remarkable man, he said, very quietly, as though they were alone in the room. I know, Elena said. 73%. Above them, the trapdoor opened again, and the light that came down with the first figure through it was the bright sweeping light of people who had arrived with authority and intention and the resources to back both. And Elena looked up at that light and then back at the phone on the floor and the progress bar sitting at 78, 79, 80% and climbing, and she understood that her father had spent 11 years building the thing that was uploading right now, that he had shaped her into the person who could reach this moment and execute it, and that everything he'd done and everything he'd hidden and the choice he'd made in the end, to protect her instead of the ledger, to trust that she'd find it herself, had brought them here under the stage of an old theater in the city they both loved to this exact second. 89%. Harlan sat down on the floor. Not forced, he just sat, cross-legged on the concrete like a man who has run a very long race and reached the end of it, and understands that sitting is now the appropriate response. 94. Cassian picked up the phone, looked at the screen, looked at Elena. 98. 99. The bar went solid, upload complete. The archive, all 11 years of it, all 3 copies, the full structure including the third layer Harlan had thought was safe, was no longer in a single server under a theater stage. It was everywhere. Cassian held the phone out to Elena, screen up, showing her the confirmation. She took it. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this with the same distant administrative interest she'd noticed her bleeding feet. A fact, registerable, not requiring immediate action. She looked at the screen and then at Cassian's face in the bad light of the substage space, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything, because what had just happened was too large for whatever words they had available. Above them, voices, clear and organized. And below, sitting on the concrete floor, the man who had run a shadow empire for 11 years and ordered her father's death with practical regret, and had watched his entire architecture come undone because Marcus Vera had trusted his daughter with the most important thing he'd ever held. Harlan looked up at her from the floor. "He was right," he said. "About you." Elena looked at him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to the man who killed her father that would fit inside the confines of this moment or any other. Cassian touched her arm. "Come up," he said. "It's done." She looked at the node on the beam, still connected, still running. It would be taken as evidence now. All of it would. The server, the archive, the financial trail. Harlan sitting quietly on the concrete floor with the look of a man settling an account he'd always known would eventually come due. She moved toward the trapdoor. Cassian went up first and reached back, and she took his hand, and he pulled her up into the backstage of the Aldwyn with its ropes and its flats and its century of performances, and the people who had come with authority were moving through the space efficiently, and Hollis was there against a wall with a cut above his eye he was holding a cloth to, and the capable one was standing with his arms folded, looking fundamentally unsurprised by everything. Elena stood on the stage side of the flat, depicting something classical and faded, and she looked out at the empty theater, the seats, the dark, the old architecture of a place built to hold stories, and she breathed, just breathed, in and out, counting the way her father had taught her, because counting put you back in your body. The watch was still against her breastbone. She reached up and held it through the fabric of her dress. Ticking, ticking, still ticking. Cassian stood beside her and didn't speak, which was right, which was the correct thing, because some moments are complete without language, and this was one of them. But it was not the last one. Outside, the city was continuing. It always was. And somewhere in the infrastructure of the internet, 11 years of her father's most careful work was moving toward the people who would know what to do with it, toward the exposure that would end not with another bloodbath, but with the specific, grinding, public light of truth brought into a room that had been dark for a very long time. It was not finished yet, but the finish was no longer something that could be prevented. And Cassian Rook, standing in the backstage dark of an old theater with his empire already beginning to dissolve around the edges, looked at the woman beside him with an expression she had never seen on his face in the 6 days she'd known him. Not strategy, not calculation, not the controlled burn she'd learned to read. Something quieter, something that had been waiting under everything else for long enough that it had stopped knowing how to announce itself. She saw it. She didn't look away. The backstage of the Aldwyn cleared slowly, the way scenes do when the action is stopped but the aftermath hasn't finished arriving yet. Federal agents, not city police. Something above that. The kind of presence that arrives with credentials that make local authorities step back. Worked through the space with the quiet efficiency of people who had been briefed thoroughly and were executing rather than improvising. Elena watched them from the wings, her back against a rope locker, her ruined stockings leaving faint rust-colored prints on the old wood floor from her cut feet, the watch in her hand, the phone in the other. The 3 upload confirmations were still on the screen. She'd looked at them 4 times. She kept looking. Cassian was 20 feet away, talking to a man in a dark jacket whose identification she hadn't seen, but whose posture said federal, and whose expression said this was not his first conversation with Cassian Rook, and probably not his most comfortable. They spoke in low voices. Cassian's hands were at his sides. He was not performing anything. Not authority, not cooperation, not the carefully composed blankness she'd watched him wear through dinners and confrontations and the worst moments of the past 6 days. He looked like a man at the end of something, which was a different thing from a man who had lost. Hollis sat 10 feet from Elena on an equipment case, the cloth still pressed to his eye, watching the room with the patience of a man for whom waiting in difficult circumstances was simply Tuesday. "Your feet need actual attention," he said, without looking at her. "I know. There's a kid in the car. You said that before. It's still true." She looked at her feet. They weren't bad. Scrapes, not cuts, the kind of damage that looks worse than it is. She looked back at the phone. "Hollis," she said. How long have you known about Harlan? He was quiet for a moment. Which part of knowing about Harlan are you asking about? Any of it. 4 months, he said. I found a financial thread I couldn't account for. Brought it to Cassian. A pause. He already knew. He'd been building a parallel case for 3 months before I found the thread. Neither of us said anything to the other because neither of us was sure yet how deep it went. Elena absorbed that. Neither of you trusted each other completely. In this business, Hollis said, trusting someone completely is how you end up in the river. He finally looked at her. But 3 months of Cassian working a case that could take down his own operation, and every move he made was about finding the truth rather than managing the outcome. That told me something. What? Hollis looked back at the room. That he was done, he said simply. Whether he knew it yet or not, a sub. Harlan was brought up through the trap door 20 minutes after Elena, and she watched them bring him across the backstage. 2 agents, one on each side, not rough, not gentle, just continuous. And he walked with the same ease he'd had in the space below, the same settled quality. A man carrying himself through consequence with the composure of someone who had always known this was a possible destination and had simply been postponing it. He looked at Elena as he passed. She didn't look away. He stopped. The agent stopped with him. The 3rd upload address, he said. The 2 I'd identified in your system. There was a 3rd. Yes, she said. Where did it go? To a journalist my father worked with for the last year of his life, Elena said. Someone he trusted. Someone completely outside this world. She held his eyes. Someone who has instructions to publish the full archive if she doesn't hear from me by 6 a.m. Something moved across Harlan's face. Not surprise. Something closer to the final piece of a calculation falling into place. He prepared you well, Harlan said. He prepared me for everything except losing him, Elena said. You took that from both of us. Harlan held her eyes for a moment longer. She thought he was going to say something else. He didn't. He looked forward, and the agents moved him through the backstage and out a door she couldn't see from where she stood, and that was the last she saw of him. She looked at the watch in her hand. She looked at the second hand making its slow, faithful arc. She put it in her pocket. Cassian found her an hour later in the empty theater itself, in the house, sitting in a seat in the 3rd row center, with the lights off and only the ghost light standing at the center of the stage. That single bare bulb on a stand, the theater tradition, left burning when the house is dark. She'd found her way out of the wings by following the soft glow of it. He sat down next to her. Not the seat directly beside her, one over, which she noted and decided was him reading the room correctly. They sat with the ghost light between them and the empty seats stretching back into the dark. Arthur Delaney, she said, detained, an hour ago. Cassian looked at the stage. He'll try to negotiate. He has enough legitimate credentials to make the process long. But the archive? The archive makes the process irrelevant, he said. His name is in the 3rd layer 12 separate times, specific, dated, transactional. He paused. Your father was very thorough. It was, Elena said. A long silence that was not uncomfortable, which she thought was worth noting, that she could sit in silence with this man in an empty theater at 2 a.m. and not feel the need to fill it. Petra, she said, and Sal. Petra is clean, or clean enough. She knew the organization was not entirely legitimate, but she didn't know the depth of it. She cooperated immediately when approached. He shifted slightly in the seat. Sal Enzo has been with me for 19 years. He was my father's man before he was mine. He knew about Harlan's operation for 8 months and said nothing to me because... Cassian stopped. Because he was protecting you, Elena said. He thought if you knew, you'd go after Harlan directly and it would get you killed. Cassian looked at her. How do you know that? The way he watched you at dinner, she said. It wasn't suspicion. It was the way old men look at people they're worried about. She paused. My father used to look at me that way. Cassian was quiet. What happens to Sal? She said. He retires, Cassian said. Formally, cleanly. He has a daughter in Genoa he hasn't seen in 3 years. He looked at the ghost light. He should go see her. Elena nodded slowly. And Dorian. This pause was different, longer. Dorian, Cassian said, is the most complicated piece of this. He told me not to go to the gala. He told you not to go because he knew Harlan would be there, and he didn't know if he could protect you. Cassian looked at his hands. What Dorian did, confirming the ledger's existence to Harlan's people 8 months before Marcus died, he did because he was approached by someone he believed was working against Harlan. He was wrong about who he was talking to. He didn't know it would cost Marcus his life. A pause. He's known for 14 months that he made the mistake that led to it. He's been trying to correct it ever since without being able to tell me, because telling me meant admitting what he did. Elena sat with that. What happens to him? He already tendered his resignation, Cassian said. Last night, before any of this. He almost smiled. Not quite, but the muscles at the corner of his mouth did something. Dorian's methodology has always been to do the difficult thing before he can talk himself out of it. Is that a quality you admire? I used to. She looked at the stage. And now? Now I think there are better methods than sacrificing yourself preemptively. He looked at her briefly. But it takes longer to learn. They stayed in the theater until 4 in the morning, not because there was reason to, but because leaving required deciding where to go next. And for a stretch of time, neither of them had an answer to that. They talked. Not the way they'd talked in the previous 6 days, everything tactical and layered, but differently, with the loose, pragmatic honesty of two people who have run out of reasons to be careful. She told him about growing up with her father, the kitchen table lessons, the way he'd explained double-entry bookkeeping using common household objects because he said abstraction without anchor was useless, the way he'd been at her college graduation, proud in that particular contained way of his, shaking hands with her professors and asking them specific questions about their research, genuinely interested, because Marcus Vera was constitutionally incapable of performing interest he didn't feel. Cassian listened. He was a good listener, which had surprised her from the beginning. Most people who command rooms don't listen, they wait. He actually listened. He told her about his father. Not the criminal architecture version, she had enough of that, but the person. A man who made coffee badly and refused to admit it, and drank everyone else's when they weren't looking. A man who had built something terrible and believed it was necessary and died before he could decide whether he'd been right. A man whose absence was a specific shape in Cassian's life, irregular and permanent, the kind you build around rather than through. At some point, Elena put her head back against the seat and looked at the ceiling of the Aldwin, the old plasterwork, and thought about the layers of it, her family and his, 23 years of connection running under everything, her mother and his father making a decision in a conference room somewhere that had echoed outward through decades and through 2 generations, and had eventually brought her to a rainy alley at 2 in the morning and a marriage certificate on a table, and this moment, this empty theater, this ghost light. My mother, she said. The protection arrangement. You said she doesn't know. She'll need to be told, Cassian said. Everything. I'll tell her, Elena said. Not you. Of course. She's going to want to know about your father's role in all of it. The history. Yes. She may have things to say about it. I expect so. He paused. I'd like to hear them. When she's ready. Elena looked at the ceiling. She's not going to be easy. No, Cassian said. I'd imagine not. And again that almost smile, the one that reached his eyes slightly more than it reached his mouth. She turned her head and looked at him in the ghost light. This man she had spent 6 days being terrified of and argued with and run through tunnels with and sat under a stage with while the architecture of a decade-long deception came apart around them. And she thought about the marriage certificate, the real one, the legal one, prepared months before she'd known his name. The marriage, she said, legally. It's real, he said. It has been since March. March. She looked at the ceiling again. You decided in March. I decided in March that if I was going to ask someone to walk into the most dangerous situation I'd ever constructed, I was going to do it with my actual name on a document that gave her actual legal standing. He said it matter-of-factly, in the tone of a man explaining a decision that had seemed straightforward at the time and he was still comfortable with. If something happened to you in the course of this, I wanted you to have recourse, assets, the ability to act. Elena sat with that for a moment. Most people would just have used a cover story, she said. I'm not most people. No, she said. You're genuinely not. The ghost light held its small, steady circle of warmth at the center of the stage, and they sat in the old theater, and neither of them said anything for a while, and outside the city did what it always did. They left at 4:30. The car that came was not the one from earlier. It was quieter, smaller, driven by someone she didn't recognize, and Hollis was not in it. Hollis had gone somewhere around 3, quietly, with the manner of a man who knows when his presence is no longer the most useful thing he can offer. The car went over the bridge. Elena watched the water below, dark and reflecting, moving the way it always moved, indifferent to everything. She thought about the archive. 3 copies, distributed, already in the hands of people who would know what to do with it. By morning, this morning, now only hours away, the framework of a decades-long criminal network would begin its process of public dissolution. Not clean. Nothing like this was ever clean. There would be lawyers and negotiations and people who spent years finding the gaps between accountability and consequence. But it would begin, and beginnings were what her father had spent 11 years making possible. She held the watch, turned it over. The 14 digits on the back. They were evidence now, documented, photographed, part of a federal case file she'd signed her name to in the backstage of the Aldwyn. The watch itself she'd been told she could keep. She thought about keeping it, and thought about her father choosing it, preparing it, handing it to her at a graduation dinner, and watching her face when she received it. She thought about him knowing even then, probably, that the day might come. Planning for it the way he planned for everything. Quietly. Completely. Without telling her, because telling her would have meant frightening her instead of preparing her. The two were not the same thing. She understood that now in her body, in a way she hadn't before. Cassian's building was quieter than she'd seen it. The extra staff from that morning were gone. The rooms she passed through on the way upstairs had the settled stillness of spaces recently vacated, furniture back in place, the faint evidence of presence and its absence. He had stopped in the main room, standing at the long table where the marriage certificate had been, where the whole arrangement had started. And she stopped too. The certificate was not on the table. She looked at the empty table. "Where is it?" she said. He reached into his jacket and set it on the table, placed it flat with both hands, smoothed it once, stepped back. It was the same document, her name and his, the typed names, the date from March, the official seal. She looked at it. "It was never a performance," he said. "From my side. I need you to know that." She looked at him. "I know." "The arrangement ends at 7 days. That was the original—" "I know what the arrangement was," she said. A silence. "Then what do you want to do with it?" he said. She looked at the certificate, at his name next to hers, at the document that had been prepared in March by a man who had decided to do things correctly even when doing them correctly was harder, and give her legal standing even when she hadn't asked for it, and who had spent 6 days being honest with her in all the ways that mattered and opaque in the ways that were about protection rather than concealment. She had spent her entire adult life being the hiding place for things too important to be left in the open. Her father's secrets. His ledger. The key to the thing that could change everything. She had carried all of it without knowing she was carrying it, and she had been good at it. She'd kept it safe. She'd delivered it where it needed to go. She'd done her father proud in ways she suspected he'd always known she would, which was why he'd trusted her with them. She was done being a hiding place. She picked up the certificate. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, paper and implication. Then she set it back down. "I'm going home," she said. "My apartment. My own space." She held his eyes. "I need to sleep in my own bed and call my mother and eat something that isn't served at a formal table." He held her eyes and nodded once. "And then," she said, "when I've done those things, and when you've done whatever you have to do in the next several weeks with the lawyers and the federal process and the dissolution of everything you've spent 15 years building, I'm going to come back here. And we're going to have an actual conversation about this certificate without any of it being a performance or an arrangement or a necessary tactic." Cassian looked at her, and something in his face was very still and then was not still, the way ice looks before it cracks. Not breaking, just releasing the tension that had held it rigid. "Okay," he said. "That's all you have to say?" "I've found," he said carefully, "that when the right thing is said, adding to it generally makes it worse." She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. And she thought the almost was enough for now. She picked up her evening bag from the chair where someone had set it, checked that the phone was inside, felt the watch in her other hand. Cassian, she said, at the doorway. He looked at her. My father trusted you, she said. He worked for you for 11 years and he trusted you enough to build the thing that could destroy you and hide it where only I could find it. He trusted that you were the kind of man who would use it correctly. She paused. I've spent 6 days figuring out whether he was right. And? He was right, she said. He usually was. She turned and walked out. The car Hollis had left for her was at the curb, engine idling, a driver she recognized from the building who drove her across the bridge and through the streets she'd walked 100 times, past the corner where the black SUV had found her 6 days ago, past the closed bar with the chairs still up on the tables, and delivered her to her own front door in the particular gray quiet of a city that has not yet decided whether it's late night or early morning. She stood at her own door and found her keys. They'd been in the evening bag the entire time, which she found funny in a way that had no laughter in it. And she let herself in and stood in her own apartment for the first time in a week. It smelled like her. That was the first thing. The specific ambient smell of a space that belongs to you, familiar in the way of things absorbed so gradually you don't notice them until you've been away long enough to notice their absence. She set the watch on her kitchen counter. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. It rang 4 times, and then her mother answered with the specific alert of someone who was already awake, who had been awake, probably, for longer than was good for her. Elena, her mother said, and in the single word was everything. The question and the fear and the relief that the phone had rung it all. I'm home, Elena said. I'm safe. I need to come see you. She paused. There are things I have to tell you. About Dad. About things he was involved in. About... She stopped because there was too much, because the full shape of what she had to tell her mother was enormous and deserved better than a phone call at 5 in the morning. About a family named Rook, her mother said quietly. Elena went still. The kitchen was very quiet around her. You knew, Elena said. Some of it, her mother said. Not all of it. Not what happened to Marcus. Not that. Her voice was steady in the way of someone making it be steady. But the history, our history with them. Yes. Elena sat down at her kitchen table, the same table she'd grown up sitting at, moved 3 times and kept, because some things you keep. When, Elena said, when were you going to tell me? When I understood how, her mother said. I was still working on that. A long pause. Is it over? Most of it. Your father, her mother said. He finished it, Elena said. Everything he built. It worked. It did exactly what he designed it to do. She pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist and counted, steady and real. He took care of it, Mom. He took care of all of it. She heard her mother breathe on the other end of the line. Just breathe, in and out, the most ordinary sound in the world, evidence of a person continuing. Come tomorrow, her mother said finally. Come tomorrow, and we'll sit at the table, and you'll tell me everything, and I'll make coffee. You make terrible coffee, Elena said. I know, her mother said. Your father always said so. They were both quiet for a moment. Tomorrow, Elena said. Tomorrow. She ended the call and set the phone on the table beside the watch and looked at the 2 objects side by side. The phone and the watch, the present and the past, both of them ordinary, both of them carrying more weight than they appeared to. She slept for 9 hours. No dreams she remembered. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. They were paperwork and depositions and the specific grinding patience of legal process, which moves the way glaciers move, inexorably, and without concern for anyone's preferred timeline. Elena gave her testimony 3 times to 3 different entities, each time starting from the beginning, each time with the watch's serial number as Exhibit A, each time reconstructing her father's architecture for people who had the credentials to dismantle what it exposed. Harlan's operation took longer to fully map than anyone had initially estimated. It always does, with structures like that. Every layer you clear reveals another layer underneath, and the people who built them specifically designed them to be difficult to follow. But Elena's father had been more thorough than Harlan had understood, and the 3rd layer of the archive was a complete accounting of 11 years of Harlan's shadow network, names and accounts and transactions, a record so precise it had taken a forensic accountant of her father's caliber to build, and was, in the end, irrefutable. Arthur Delaney was indicted on 14 counts. He tried to negotiate for 6 weeks and then stopped, because the archive had made negotiation theatrical rather than productive. And Arthur Delaney, whatever else he was, had always understood theater. Dorian Vale resigned formally from Cassian's organization and moved to a smaller city, somewhere inland, somewhere without a skyline that reminded him of everything the skyline reminded him of. He sent Elena a note, handwritten, 3 sentences. "Your father was owed better from me. I know that. I'm sorry." She read it twice and put it in a drawer she didn't open often, and thought that some debts can't be paid, but at least this one had been acknowledged by someone capable of shame. Petra Hale cooperated with federal investigators and was not charged. She took the information Elena had found in the Q2 accounts, expanded it, and produced a full accounting of the extraction through Delaney's trust, which added 4 more counts to the indictment and removed any ambiguity about who had been doing what to whom for 18 months. She sent Elena a bottle of wine through a courier with a card that said, "Only good eye." Elena drank it on a Tuesday evening, sitting at her kitchen table grading the financial documents of a forensic accounting case she'd taken on as a consultant because her father's skills needed to go somewhere, and this seemed like the right direction. Sal Enzo went to Genoa. He sent a postcard. Cassian's empire did not collapse dramatically. It dissolved. The legitimate assets, and there were more of them than anyone had expected, because Cassian had been quietly building legitimacy for years in preparation for something he'd never said aloud, were transferred, restructured, rerouted. A foundation was established, named after no one, which quietly funded several organizations that provided legal aid and housing resources. Elena only learned about it from a federal document 3 months later and thought, he did that without telling anyone. She thought about the watch and about things placed in the most ordinary places, and she thought her father would have understood that completely. The criminal organization, the architecture of influence and threat, and the careful management of violence as a business instrument ended. Not with a bang. With the steady outward flow of the archive's contents into the hands of people who knew what to do with them, and the subsequent removal of every structure that had depended on secrecy to function. It took 4 months. It was the most expensive 4 months of Cassian Rook's life, in every sense of expensive. She went back on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday had any significance, because it was the day she finished the last deposition and drove back into the city and found herself, without having fully planned it, parked outside the building she'd been brought to on a rainy night 7 months ago. She sat in the car for a while. Then she got out. The building was quieter than it had been, different. The texture of the space had changed. The staff she remembered were gone. New people, fewer. The specific energy of an organization operating at a different scale. She was met at the door by someone she didn't know who called her by name and took her upstairs without explaining how they knew who she was, which told her Cassian had been expecting her, or something enough like expecting her that the distinction didn't matter. He was in the main room, not the workroom with the photographs and the maps. The main room, at the long table, with a coffee cup and a newspaper, and the look of a man who had been doing the ordinary things of a morning, and was comfortable with ordinary things, in a way he hadn't been when she'd known him. He looked up. She looked at him. He had changed in 7 months in the way people change when the defining pressure of their life is removed. Not smaller, nothing like that, but settled. Like a landscape after a sustained wind stops. Still the same topography, but you could see it properly now. "You didn't call first," he said. "No. I would have made better coffee." "Is this coffee bad?" "Mediocre," he said. "I'm working on it." She sat down across from him. The table was clear. No certificate, no documents, nothing between them but the coffee cup and the folded newspaper and the morning light coming through the long east window at an angle that was different from the winter light she'd first seen here. "How's your mother?" he said. "Adjusting," Elena said. "She has questions, a lot of questions. She'd like to meet you, she says, when she decides what she wants to say to you." "I'll be here." "She's not going to be easy. You said that before." "It keeps being true." He almost smiled. The full version this time. Not the almost, not the muscle movement, but the actual thing, arriving on his face with the slight awkwardness of something that had been out of use and was finding its range again. She reached into her bag and set the watch on the table between them. He looked at it. "I want to give it to the foundation," she said. Not as a display piece, just as the thing it actually is. The thing that finished what my father started. She paused. I don't want to keep carrying it. It's done what it was for. Cassian looked at the watch for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Okay, he said. That's still all you say. I told you why. She leaned back in the chair and looked at the room. This room where the whole impossible thing had started, where she'd stood in wet clothes with the certificate at her feet and a man she didn't know telling her she had 7 days. The room looked different in the daylight, smaller, somehow. More like a place where people actually lived rather than a set constructed to project power. She thought about the woman who'd stood in it 7 months ago. Wet, frightened, furious, holding a watch she didn't understand yet in a hand that hadn't stopped shaking since the alley. She thought about that woman with the specific tenderness of someone looking at an earlier version of themselves across a distance that is both short and enormous. She'd done all right, that woman. She'd been her father's daughter all the way down. The certificate, she said. Cassian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The same movement, the same jacket reaching she'd watched him make in this room on the first morning, and set it on the table. Her name and his, the March date, the official seal. She looked at it. I've been thinking, she said, about what makes a choice real. And? I think it's when both people know what they're choosing, she said, not what they're arranged into or what circumstances make necessary, what they're actually choosing. She looked at him. You made a unilateral decision in March. I did. With good intentions. Yes. You're going to have to stop doing that, she said. Making unilateral decisions with good intentions. It's not… She paused. It doesn't leave room for the other person. He held her eyes. I know. Do you? I'm learning, he said. It's taking longer than I'd like. She considered him. This man who had spent 15 years being the most controlled person in every room he entered, who had built an empire on the management of outcomes, who had arranged her into a marriage before he'd met her because he'd believed it was the safest way to protect her, and had been right about the safety and wrong about the arrangement, and who was sitting across from her now with his mediocre coffee and his folded newspaper looking like someone who was genuinely, haltingly, trying to learn something new at 43. She picked up the certificate. She held it for a moment. The weight of it, the specific gravity of a document that had been a weapon and an arrangement and a legal fact, and now was waiting to be something else, or nothing at all. She set it back down on the table between them. Ask me, she said. He looked at the certificate, looked at her. In the morning light, his face was just his face, not the controlled mask, not the boardroom stillness, not the terrifying reputation of a man whose name entire organizations whispered. Just the face of someone who had come a very long way and was not entirely certain what came next and was, she thought, probably going to be all right. Elena, he said. Yes. No performance, no arrangement, no 7 days. No, she said. None of that. He looked at the certificate and then at her and he said, Will you? She looked at this man, at everything he was and everything he'd been and everything the next several years of figuring out who he was without the empire would cost him, and probably also her, in the specific currency of difficult things being worked through by imperfect people who had chosen each other with full information and open eyes. She thought about her father at her graduation dinner, pressing the watch into her hand. Your grandfather's. He'd want you to have it. He'd been lying. And he'd been telling the truth. Both simultaneously, the way the most important things usually are. She picked up the certificate. Yes, she said. Not like a woman who had been maneuvered into position. Like a woman who had carried the most important thing through the most difficult terrain and delivered it intact and was now, for the first time, making a choice that was entirely her own. Cassian reached across the table. She put the certificate in his hand. He held it the way he'd held the watch on the first morning, carefully, like something that could break, and also like something that had already survived a great deal and might be more durable than it appeared. Outside, the city continued. The bridge over the river caught the morning light and threw it back bright and clean, and the water moved the way water moves, without memory of what had passed over it, without anticipation of what would, just moving, as it had always moved, through the ordinary, extraordinary fact of another day, beginning in a city that had no idea what it had just come through and would have no idea tomorrow. And that was fine. That was exactly fine. The watch sat on the table between them, still ticking, keeping its faithful account of the seconds as they passed, not counting down to anything anymore, not hiding anything anymore, just doing the simple, unremarkable thing it had always been made to do. Marking time. The kind that belongs to the living.